This week, we're talking about the cooperative games of 1980. But first, let's quickly take a look at what else was going on in the world of gaming in 1980. In the arcades, we had Pac-Man, Crazy Climber, Berserk, Missile Command, as well as Phoenix. On the Atari 2600, we saw Adventure, which could arguably be one of the first action-adventure games of all time, and was definitely an influence on games like Zelda. Nintendo released their first Game & Watch. This was another great year for classic video games, but there's perhaps less notable titles in the cooperative realm of video games, but let's take a look. So let's start with Space Invaders on the Atari 2600. It was a groundbreaking arcade phenomenon, and it greatly boosted Atari's success, selling over 1 million copies for the Atari 2600 and fueling console sales, earning it the title of the first killer app. It was a simplified yet innovative space-based game in 1980, featuring opponents that fired back, destructible barriers, and high-score recording. Players controlled a laser cannon, defending against descending waves of invaders, seeking to shoot them all while avoiding their laser beam. Shield barriers offered limited protection, and occasional alien spaceships could be shot for extra points. The game's sound effects closely resembled the arcade version, with 112 variations, including multiplayer options. Space Invaders provided ample replay value, marking a milestone in video game history. And yes, the thing that sets the Atari 2600 version apart from the arcade version is the inclusion of a 2-player co-op mode. There's one version where one player controls the ship and the other player shoots. It's a fun yet kind of simple way of working together, but the version that I love is where you each control your own ship and you work together to defend against the invaders. Very simple gameplay, but it's fun to play with a friend. Armor Attack, developed by Tim Skelly and released by Cinematronics in 1980, is a multi-directional shooter that offers intense combat between the player's jeep and enemy vehicles in an overhead view of a town. This arcade classic, later licensed to Sega in Japan, features vector graphics, where the overlay on the monitor adds a green tint and outlines the buildings. The game was also adapted for the Vectrex in 1982. Gameplay involves rotating the Jeep clockwise or counterclockwise using buttons, moving it forward with a gas pedal simulation, and firing rockets straight ahead, and a tracking helicopter periodically spawn, with tanks moving in fixed patterns and turrets following the player's movement. Tanks require 2 hits to destroy, and players can have 2 rockets in play. Colliding with enemy fire or vehicles leads to player's death, while destroying the helicopter grants an extra life. The game's intensity periodically increases for added challenge, with the cooperative 2-player mode also available. Wizard of War, an arcade game released in 1980 by Midway, allows up to 2 players to cooperate in battling through monster-filled mazes by shooting creatures. The game was later adapted for various platforms, including the Atari 8-bit, Atari 2600, Atari 5200, Bally Astrocade, and Commodore 64. Players referred to as Warriors, with an O, must eliminate monsters in rectangular grid dungeons with corridors and walls. The game features monsters with unique abilities, including turning invisible, and introduces increasingly challenging enemy lineups as players progress. The titular Wizard of War emerges in later levels, taunting players and adding complexity. With special dungeons, bonuses, and evolving titles for players, the game offers an engaging and ever-challenging gameplay experience. Ripoff, a black and white vector graphics arcade game, once again developed by Tim Skelly and released by Cinematronics in 1980, introduced cooperative gameplay and flocking behavior. A Vectrex port arrived in 1982. In Ripoff, 1 or 2 players control tank-like vehicles, aiming to prevent computer-controlled pirate tanks from stealing 8 canisters at the screen's center. Pirate tanks rush to drag the canisters off the edge, with varying point values based on the speed and strategy. Players must shoot or collide with enemies to defend the canisters. The game's difficulty escalates through waves, introducing higher point tanks with lasers and bonus levels that increase in speed and challenge, concluding when all canisters are taken by pirate tanks. This is a pretty fun take on the old school arcade shooter. It plays somewhat similar to Asteroids, but you just work together to defend the canisters. And there is an overlay that shows some colors to differentiate the barriers and where the canisters are supposed to sit, which adds a little bit of diversity to the images of this game. I really enjoyed this one. Warlords, an arcade game released by Atari in 1980, is a unique fusion of Breakout and Quadrupong, allowing up to 4 players to engage simultaneously. The game involves brick wall castles, vulnerable to a fiery ball's impact. It's available in both a 2-player upright version and a 4-player cocktail version, operated through spinner controls. The upright version presents a 3D illusion by reflecting the game on a mirror, with castle backdrops, while the cocktail version supports 1 to 4 players, encouraging collaborative play in addition to competitive matches. Each player assumes the role of a warlord, striving to obliterate opponents' castles while defending their own with a movable shield. The strategy involves using spinning fireballs to breach castle walls. Destroyed icons release fireballs, traveling in the opposite direction, and the last player with an intact icon receives a bonus point. Playing the game in either 1 or 2 player modes will pit the player either against 3 AI-controlled warlords or with an ally against 2 of them. Win and you advance to another level that looks pretty much the same. So there are 5 co-op games that all came out in 1980. Are there any that we missed? And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to watch our co-op games of the 1970s video. And tune in next week. We're going to be doing another episode of the Best of Co-op series. That one will be about 1981 co-op games. Thank you for watching.